All right, hello once again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and I'm about to start on a series of videos that correspond with the Microsoft.com ASP.NET MVC Getting Started series. All right, you'll notice that again we have three series of articles. The first one that I'm going to start with is Getting Started with ASP.NET MVC5. I'll go through these 11 articles. Then I'm going to jump down, not to the second, but to the third one, EF for Entity Framework, Database First with ASP.NET MVC, and we'll go through these 7 articles. And then we will come back for the Getting Started with Entity Framework 6 using MVC5, these 12 articles. That's the game plan. Of course, not all in one lecture. The hope is that each one of these can be done in their own lecture, and that they will last, I don't know, somewhere around 20 or so minutes apiece, but we'll see as we get going. Some may be a little bit longer, some may be shorter. I also must mention before we get started, you may or may not be able to hear if you listen in the background, that little chirping. For some reason, we've got a box here in room T201 at Rankin, and I don't know if we lost power this weekend or what, but about every 5 or 10 seconds, it makes a little chirp. The good news is I'm pretty doggone loud, so hopefully it's not really going to matter. All right? So let's get started with getting started. All right? Now, as we go through these things, what you will notice is the author says 3 minutes to read. That's not necessarily true. All right, because the idea is you want to take enough time out of it that you can really understand what's being discussed. Probably the next time this class is taught, we'll use the ASP.NET Core MVC tutorial. But for now, because our book uses ASP.NET MVC with Visual Studio 2015 and only has a chapter on ASP.NET Core, we're going to use the one that's in here. It's not old. It's 3 years old, almost to the day. A week from today, it'll be 3 years old. All right? So, there's also a tutorial on Razor. I didn't print those out. I didn't print out this thing. You feel welcome to go through it, but what we're going to do is we're going to do the getting started. And again, we are not going to be using Visual Studio 2017. I'm not. I have to ask my cohort, Mr. Paul Smith, at Rankin Technical College, St. Louis, if he's going to. But the book that we're using supposes that you're using Visual Studio 2015. So that's what I'm planning on using. As it mentions here, Visual Studio is an IDE. In other words, it's an integrated development environment. We will use it to create our ASP for Active Server Pages, .NET, MVC, or Model View Controller applications. All right, we'll bring it up in just a minute. I know you've seen it. I know you've worked with it before, especially those of you who are in the prerequisite to this class, which is AWD1111, the C# programming class. All right, so this is what they have you build in here. This is what we're going to build. I'm following their lead. All right, so I'm going to start up Visual Studio. I'm running Visual Studio Community, which is the free version, 2015. And if you say, gee, Jeff, how do I get that? You just type in Visual Studio 2015 Community Edition free download. And it says here, download older versions. All right, and I will bring that up. And it looks like it brings you to right here. Let me make that bigger so you can see it. And there you go. It, you know, if you don't have it already in your machine and you go out to visualstudio.com/VS for Visual Studio /older-downloads/, all right, you'll get to here. Of course they want you to download the newest version, all right? But there's Visual Studio 2015. All right, so you can go there. You could even go earlier, but that's the one I'm going to use. All right, so with that up, the first thing they tell us to do here is to click New Project, select Visual C# on the left, then Web, then select ASP.NET Web Application.NET Framework, and call it MVC Movie. I'm going to follow their lead for everything in here. All right, so I'm coming in here. I don't like doing it from the start page, although you can. So I'm going to do a File, New, Project. I think that's what they told us to do. File, New Project, C# Web, C# Web. So I'm there. And I think it's ASP.NET Web Application. I think it's the one that's right there. .NET Framework. That's it. All right, I'm going to save this out on my desktop. Should work okay. And I'm going to call it MVC Movie. Why? Because, again, that's what they tell us to save it as. I'm also going to say Create Directory for Solution, and I'm going to click Create New Git Repository, because I am going to use source code that every time I go through one of these lessons, when I get finished or completed with the lessons, all right, I'm going to upgrade. You'll see what I mean. Just basically make a copy then. So, okay. All right, and it comes up right here. Just keep following our steps here. In the new ASP.NET project dialog that comes up, choose MVC and OK. Once we click the box here for MVC, this should be checked automatically. We could add unit tests. They're not telling us to do that here. We could change our authentication. All right, they're not telling us to do that here either. I'm just following their lead. So I'm choosing MVC. Notice Web Forms was chosen at first. So Web Forms here was checked. Now I want MVC, so that's checked. You still can check any of these other ones. We don't want to. We're not going to change our authentication. We're not going to add unit tests. Notice under the change authentication, we can set it to no authentication whatsoever, individual user accounts, work and school accounts, or Windows authentication. We are not told to change this, so I'm leaving it to the default. We're not going to click the Microsoft Azure host in the cloud, and we're not going to choose anything here. If we clicked here, I think we could go down there and say, what are we doing? Are we running on a virtual machine, on a VM or whatever? We're not. So I did that. Again, I'm being extremely deliberate here. All right. All right. So I'm doing all of that. Coming back in here, and I'm clicking OK. Watch what happens as our project gets created over here on the right. There will be a whole data folder hierarchy that will be set up for us here. It'll take them, half a minute or so to build. And if your system's really slow, maybe up to a minute to build. All right. And here it comes. So what you will notice in here, this is already a working, viable application. Also, let's very quickly look at the stuff that's in here. we've got an app data folder. App data is where you put your database, really your data source, which is typically going to be a database. We've got app start, and that has a bunch of things in here. Bundleconfig.cs, filterconfig.cs, identityconfig.cs, routeconfig.cs, and startupauth.cs. All right. We've got this content that has what the system gave us, which is the Bootstrap CSS file, both minified and non-minified, and site.css, which is going to be our own CSS file. Also, typically, image files are put in this content folder also. Next, as you'd probably guess, this is where our controllers will go. All right, this is just a start page right here. So if I close this start page and I go in and I run my program, notice here we've got account controller.cs, home controller.cs, and manage controller.cs. I'm running this for a reason. So account, home, and manage. What this is going to do is this is going to run this, and it's going to run it out on, basically it's using my machine as both a client and a server. It picks a random port, in this case 57497, to run this. But there's a method to my madness. There's a reason I want to show you this right now. This is, again, what we get, as the saying goes, out of the box. And no, it's not going to be empty. At least it shouldn't be. It looks like it's still loading. I have a hard copy of each one of these lessons also. So if you hear me flipping around a little bit, that's what you're going to be hearing. All right? You may or may not have noticed that to run this, I clicked, it's not showing right now, but there was a green button with an arrow on it. All right, there's other ways to build this also. To me, that's probably the easiest way. There we go. All right, so notice application name, home, which gets us to right where we are, about, which is really an about page with virtually nothing in it, and contact, which was really another page with virtually nothing in it. But see this register and this login, this stuff here? The reason I'm showing you those are because those are the ones, as I go back to my program here and stop the run, that deal with the account controller and the manage controller. All right, that's the stuff that's built in because of the options that we chose. The home controller right now is almost empty. All right, controllers, if you remember from an earlier lesson, they sort of act as the traffic cop. In other words, the URL request comes in from the user's machine, and eventually it finds its way over to the correct controller, in this case the home controller, which will eventually figure out which of these models to call, all right, to get information we might need. It'll send that information back to the controller so that it can send it out to the associate or the correct view so it can come back to the user in the form of HTML. You say, well, that was too much. I don't understand all that. That's what this whole course is about. All right? So we did go through. We clicked. I didn't click F5. I chose the green button, but it's no biggie. Notice it causes Visual Studio to start IIS Express. In other words, it launches, it is using your machine as both a client and a server. All right? Now, not everyone will agree with the verbiage that I'm using here, but that's the way I look at it. So right out of the box, as we saw, it gave us a home page, a contact page, and an about page. I just showed you all those. They don't show you all of them here. All right. Now it says here, would you like to see the finished site running as a live web app? You can deploy a complete version of the app to your Azure account simply by clicking the following button. We haven't talked about Azure Next. I'm not going to right now. All right. But this was part 1 of 11. Instead, I'm going to go on to the next part, which is adding a controller. So we're in this getting started with MVC5. We just went through the getting started section. We're about to jump into adding the controller. Notice it's MVC, so we're going to start with controller, then view, then model. Really the opposite of MVC. We're doing CVM. All right? But I will be back in just a couple minutes, and when I come back, I will be discussing adding a controller. So I'll be back with that in just a couple minutes.